I spent years caring for the family business, only to watch my younger sibling take credit at the annual celebration, and that's when I realized my parents never truly appreciated my sacrifice. My name is Rachel, and I'm 36 years old. For more than a decade, I've worked in my family's small but thriving catering company, Linford and Daughters Events. The name itself is a half-truth. There's only one daughter who actually works there, and that's me. My younger brother, Evan, is 28, the so-called visionary of the business, at least according to my parents. In reality, he only started showing up 2 years ago, long after I'd built nearly everything from scratch. The systems, the clients, the logistics, the brand's reputation. Still, somehow, it's his face on the company's social media, his name that clients know, and his words that my parents seem to quote at every family dinner. I started working for my parents when I was 24, right after college. My degree in business administration wasn't anything special, but I believed I could turn their small neighborhood catering business into something bigger, more professional. Back then, the company was barely staying afloat. My parents took on whatever events they could find: backyard weddings, funerals, corporate luncheons, small-town festivals. They were hardworking people, but organization wasn't their strength. Bookkeeping was a mess, communication was scattershot, and every event felt like a frantic race against time. I came in thinking I'd help temporarily, just until I found a real job. But weeks turned into months, and then years. Before I knew it, I had dedicated my entire adulthood to making sure the business didn't fall apart. I restructured everything. I built a client management system from scratch, modernized the website, created marketing materials, and started a social media presence. I negotiated contracts, handled budgets, and recruited staff who could actually handle large-scale events. My parents were grateful at first. My mom would brag to her friends about how I'd saved the company. My dad would pat me on the shoulder and say things like, "Couldn't have done it without you, kiddo." I clung to those moments because they were rare but meaningful. They made the long nights and constant stress feel worthwhile. Evan, at that time, was still in college, studying graphic design, but mostly spending his weekends at music festivals and his weekdays sleeping through morning lectures. We didn't have much in common, though I cared about him deeply. He was the golden boy, effortlessly charming and full of ideas that rarely went anywhere. My parents adored him for his creativity, his confidence, and his social ease. I was the grounded one, reliable, predictable, the person they could count on to show up when things got messy. I didn't resent him for it then, I just thought that was how families worked. When Evan graduated, he bounced between short-term jobs for a while: photography, marketing internships, freelance graphic work. He had a knack for making people like him, and my parents always believed he'd figure it out soon. Around the time he turned 26, he came to one of our annual company events and made a presentation to my parents about modernizing the brand. I remember sitting there, tired from a week of double shifts, listening to him describe ideas that sounded like echoes of what I had already been implementing for years. He proposed a new logo, a rebranding campaign, and a social media push, all things I had suggested and executed long ago. But when he talked, my parents' faces lit up as if they were hearing revolutionary concepts for the first time. I told myself not to care. What mattered, I thought, was that the business continued to grow. The rebranding went forward, of course, with Evan taking the lead. My father introduced him at meetings as our creative director. I tried to be supportive. I trained him on the systems I had built, walked him through client processes, and even covered for him when he made inevitable rookie mistakes: double-booked staff, overpromised to clients, and miscalculated budgets. Each time, I fixed the fallout quietly, because I didn't want to embarrass him or make my parents feel like they'd made a mistake in trusting him. But slowly, things began to shift. Clients started associating the success of events with Evan's creative vision. My parents began deferring to him on decisions they once trusted me with. He started doing interviews for local magazines, and when our company got featured in a regional business article, he was the one quoted as the driving force behind Linford and Daughters' success. I remember reading that article at midnight after a 12-hour day and feeling a physical ache in my chest. Not anger at Evan, not exactly, more like a hollowing sadness that all those years of sacrifice were being quietly erased. The sacrifices were not small ones. I had given up relationships, vacations, and even health. There were years when I barely saw friends. I'd missed weddings and birthdays because events had to run. My parents' house, where the business operated for years, became my second home. I'd show up before sunrise, stay after everyone left, and handle cleanup when staff canceled. I'd sit with my mom as she balanced invoices, and I'd soothe her panic when a client threatened to cancel. The business wasn't just a job for me, it was my identity, my commitment, my legacy. Still, I told myself it didn't matter who got the credit. What mattered was that our family stayed strong, that we succeeded together. That's what I believed or tried to. But the illusion began to fracture in small ways. I noticed how, at family dinners, my parents would ask Evan for his input on company direction but barely acknowledge mine. When I suggested adjustments to our workflow or hiring, they'd say things like, "Let Evan take the lead on that. He's got a great sense of where things are headed." I'd smile and nod, pretending not to notice that their tone toward me had subtly changed from admiration to condescension. The breaking point began to build months before the annual celebration. Every year, we held a company party to thank staff and recognize achievements. I used to plan every detail: the venue, the catering, the speeches. It was my favorite night of the year because it reminded me why all the effort mattered. But this year, Evan insisted he wanted to organize it his way. My parents agreed immediately, telling me I should take a step back and enjoy myself for once. It sounded nice, but it felt like being benched from a team I had built with my own hands. The weeks leading up to the event were tense. Evan was constantly on the phone, planning decorations, hiring a photographer, and coordinating with clients we'd worked with that year. I tried to stay out of it, focusing on other work, but I could feel something brewing beneath the surface, a shift in how the story of our family business was being told. One afternoon, while updating our financial statements, I found a draft of a presentation Evan had prepared for the celebration. It outlined the journey of Linford and Daughters under new leadership. My stomach dropped as I read through it. My name wasn't mentioned once. At first I thought it had to be an oversight, maybe just a draft, but as I scrolled through the slides, it became painfully clear that it wasn't a mistake. Every milestone that had taken me years of exhaustion to achieve was credited to the new direction brought by Evan Linford. My contribution was invisible, erased. I sat there staring at the computer screen, frozen, my hands trembling. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe he just hadn't finished the presentation. Maybe he'd include me later. But deep down I knew. I had felt this coming for months, and now it was here, staring me in the face like a mirror reflecting a decade of sacrifice no one wanted to see. And that's when I realized something that had been building quietly in the background all along. My parents didn't actually value what I had done. They valued the appearance of success, the charm, the face they could present to the world. I had been the scaffolding, invisible and necessary, but never meant to stand in the spotlight. That night, as I drove home, the weight of that truth settled in my chest like concrete. The celebration was still a week away, and I had no idea what I was going to do, whether I'd confront them, walk away, or simply let the night play out. But something inside me had shifted irreversibly. For the first time, I wasn't just tired. I was done pretending that what I had given was invisible. The week leading up to the celebration felt strangely quiet, almost deceptive. I went through my routines, emails, staff scheduling, supplier calls. But my mind was somewhere else entirely. Every time I saw Evan breezing through the office, chatting with clients and cracking jokes with the team, a coldness spread through me. He looked so confident, so sure of his place in the story we'd built. I couldn't tell whether he genuinely believed the narrative he was spreading, or if he simply didn't care who got left out as long as he got the spotlight. My parents were buzzing with excitement. My mom kept talking about how proud she was of the direction the company was taking, how modern and forward-thinking Evan had made it. My dad spent hours polishing old trophies and preparing the slideshow for the evening. Every time they mentioned Evan's name, my chest tightened a little more. I wanted to speak up, to tell them that the very systems running smoothly beneath his leadership existed because of me. But I couldn't bring myself to do it. It wasn't pride holding me back. It was exhaustion. I had spent years explaining myself, proving my worth, and trying to earn recognition that never seemed to arrive. The morning of the celebration, I woke up before sunrise. I made coffee, sat by the kitchen window and watched the sky lighten from gray to orange. My apartment was quiet, no ringing phones, no orders, no chaos. For a few fleeting minutes I felt peace. I thought about the girl I used to be at 24, full of optimism, believing that hard work always paid off. Somewhere along the line, I had replaced passion with obligation. I wasn't doing this for myself anymore. I was doing it because I was scared of what would happen if I stopped. Around noon, my mom called to ask if I was still coming early to help set up. The irony made me want to laugh. Of course I'd still be the one setting up, even when I wasn't supposed to be in charge. I said yes, partly because I didn't want to start a fight, but mostly because I wanted to see firsthand what kind of story they were about to tell the world. When I arrived at the event hall, everything looked pristine. The venue glowed with gold string lights. A live band was tuning up near the stage, and the catering team, our own staff, was busy plating hors d'oeuvres. I recognized the menu instantly. It was one I had designed years ago for another client. even that had been recycled under Evan's name. He stood in the center of the room, dressed sharply in a tailored navy suit, laughing with our staff and shaking hands with guests. For a moment, I simply watched him. There was something almost theatrical about how effortlessly he occupied the space, how he drew people in. I could see why my parents adored him. He wasn't malicious by nature. He was magnetic, the kind of person who could make anyone believe in him. And maybe that was why no one ever looked behind the curtain to see who had actually kept the machine running. My parents greeted me with hugs, my mom gushing about how beautiful everything looked. My dad told me not to stress tonight, that I should enjoy myself and let Evan handle things. I smiled and nodded, as I always did, hiding the storm brewing inside me. I felt invisible in that room, like a ghost haunting a life I'd built but no longer belonged to. As the evening began, guests poured in, clients, vendors, family friends, and local business owners. I saw people I hadn't seen in years come up to my parents and congratulate them on the incredible growth this year. I heard Evan's name repeated like a mantra, attached to words like genius, leadership, and innovation, and every time it happened, I felt another thread inside me snap. When the speeches began, I stood near the back of the room, nursing a glass of champagne I didn't even want. My father took the stage first, thanking everyone for coming and praising the team that made it all possible. He talked about our journey, our struggles, our triumphs, and then he introduced Evan as the visionary who brought Linford and Daughters into a new era. The applause that followed was thunderous. Evan took the microphone with a practiced smile. He spoke about family, about hard work, about the foundations our parents had laid. He mentioned me briefly as part of the supportive team that kept things running. The way he said it made me feel like a footnote in my own story. The presentation I had glimpsed earlier that week played behind him, showing photos of events I had organized, designs I had approved, and clients I had secured, all attributed to his creative leadership. I don't remember how long I stood there. My hands trembled slightly as I clapped with everyone else, my smile frozen. When the slideshow reached the section titled Milestones of the Last 5 Years, I saw one image that made my breath hitch. It was a photo of a massive wedding event we'd done 3 summers ago. One that had nearly fallen apart when our supplier failed to deliver on time. I had driven 3 hours to find replacement decorations, stayed up all night arranging centerpieces by hand, and saved the event from disaster. That wedding was the turning point for our company's reputation. Seeing Evan take credit for it in front of hundreds of people felt like a knife twisting in my chest. After the speech, people swarmed him, congratulating and praising him. My parents beamed like proud royalty. I slipped away from the crowd, heading toward the side exit to get some air. The night was cool, and the sound of laughter and music spilled from the hall behind me. I leaned against the railing outside, my heart heavy and my mind spinning. For years, I had believed that staying quiet was the noble choice, that humility was its own reward. But as I stood there in the cold, watching my breath fog in the air, I realized humility had become a cage. I had spent too long making myself small so others could shine brighter. I didn't even notice my mother stepping outside until she called my name softly. She was holding a glass of white wine, her face glowing with the joy of the evening. She asked why I wasn't inside enjoying the celebration. I wanted to tell her the truth, that I couldn't celebrate something built on lies. But instead, I said I just needed a minute to breathe. She smiled kindly and told me how proud she was of both of us, how Evan had really come into his own. I asked her as casually as I could whether she ever thought about how much I had done over the years. Her smile faltered slightly, and she said something I'll never forget. "You've always been good at keeping things steady, sweetheart. But Evan, he's the one with the spark." I felt the words like a punch to the gut. Keeping things steady, as if that wasn't the reason the business had survived at all. As if stability, consistency, and hard work were somehow less worthy than a smile and an idea. I wanted to scream, but I didn't. I just nodded, staring out into the parking lot, realizing that maybe I had been wrong all these years about what family really meant. When I finally went back inside, the band had started playing and people were dancing. Evan was surrounded by friends and clients, my father by his side, laughing with pride. I stood at the edge of the crowd, watching them. It felt like an out-of-body experience, like I was witnessing the moment my own narrative was erased from history. Something hardened inside me then. For the first time, I didn't just feel tired. I felt finished. Finished trying to win their approval, finished playing the role of the reliable daughter, finished sacrificing myself for recognition that would never come. I didn't know what I would do next, but one thing was certain: I couldn't stay invisible any longer. That realization was both terrifying and liberating. Because when you've spent your life giving everything to people who refuse to see you, the moment you finally decide to stop, to step back, or even walk away, the world suddenly tilts. You realize you've been holding up a structure that was never meant to support you. And now, for the first time, I was ready to see what would happen when I let it fall. The morning after the celebration, the house was still buzzing with leftover excitement. My parents had hosted a small brunch at their place for family and staff who'd stayed overnight. I showed up late, partly because I didn't want to face anyone, but also because I needed time to think. The sleepless night had given me a kind of numb clarity. I wasn't going to explode, or cry, or beg to be seen anymore. I was just done. When I walked into the dining room, everyone was talking about the event. Evan sat at the head of the table, animatedly describing how he wanted to expand the company's services into event design and floral production. My father nodded approvingly, my mother giggled proudly at every sentence, and the staff around him listened as if he were the CEO of a Fortune 500 company. The sight was almost surreal. I felt like an outsider peering into someone else's life. A life I had built, brick by brick, but no longer belonged to. When my mother saw me, she called me over and insisted I sit beside her. She was glowing. She started talking about the attention the company had received after the event. Local papers had reached out for interviews, new clients had sent emails overnight, and social media posts had exploded with likes and shares. Every mention of Evan's leadership rolled off her tongue with a kind of reverence that made my stomach twist. I nodded, forcing a smile, but my mind was far away. I thought of the spreadsheet waiting on my laptop, the endless trail of unpaid invoices I had managed, the supply contracts I had negotiated, the marketing analytics I had tracked, all invisible. I thought of the late nights spent scrubbing dishes after catering gigs because the cleaning staff hadn't shown up, the emergency deliveries I'd made in the pouring rain, the weekends I'd sacrificed while Evan was still figuring out what he wanted to do with his life, and now here I was invisible in my own family's story. After brunch, Evan cornered me in the kitchen while I was washing a few dishes. His tone was almost condescendingly casual, the way someone might talk to an employee they knew couldn't quit. He said he hoped I wasn't upset about last night, that he knew I liked things low-key, and didn't enjoy attention anyway. It was his way of pretending he was being considerate, but really, it was just another subtle way of erasing me. I didn't argue, I just said, calmly, that I wasn't upset, but something in my voice must have betrayed me because he paused, studying my face with mild discomfort. Then he laughed it off, patted my shoulder, and said we made great team. I wanted to tell him what it really felt like to be the uncredited partner in that so-called team. But I didn't, because arguing with Evan was like shouting into the wind, loud, exhausting, and ultimately pointless. That afternoon, I went back to the office while everyone else was still celebrating. I needed to be alone to think. The quiet was almost eerie. The decorations from the event were stacked in a corner, the smell of champagne still lingering in the air. I sat at my desk, the same one I'd worked at for 12 years, and stared at the framed photo of our family on the shelf. It was taken during one of our early events years ago. We were younger, smiling, and genuinely proud of what we were building. My father's hand rested on my shoulder in that picture. Now, even looking at it felt like a lie. I opened the company's financial folders, more out of habit than anything. For years, I'd been the only one who truly understood the administrative side: invoices, payroll, contracts, tax documents. Evan's visionary plans didn't include the unglamorous work of keeping the business solvent. But as I scrolled through the numbers, something caught my attention. There were new expense entries I hadn't approved: marketing contracts, design consultations, and consulting fees, all signed by Evan. The amounts weren't catastrophic, but they were reckless. If he kept spending at that rate, he could easily put the company in danger. A small spark lit inside me, not anger, but resolve. If my family was going to let him run things, then fine, let him. But I wasn't going to clean up his mess anymore. For years, I had been the silent safety net, the one who fixed everything behind the scenes so no one had to deal with consequences. Maybe it was time to stop cushioning their fall. I started writing notes, a summary of where everything stood financially, lists of suppliers, passwords to systems, client contacts, everything Evan would need if I disappeared tomorrow. I stored it all in a neatly labeled folder on the shared drive titled Operations Overview. It wasn't out of kindness, it was closure. I wanted to walk away knowing I hadn't left chaos behind. By the time I was done, the sun was setting outside the window. The orange light fell across the office walls, and for a moment I just sat there, breathing deeply. My body felt lighter than it had in years. I didn't know what I would do next, maybe travel, maybe finally start something of my own, but one thing was clear: I was leaving. When I told my parents 2 days later, the reaction was exactly what I expected. My mother was stunned at first, then immediately dismissive. She said I was just tired and needed a break. My father, always the pragmatic one, asked if I could at least stay through the next quarter to help transition Evan into full management. I said no, not because I wanted to hurt them, but because I had to draw a line. Evan's face, though, that was the one I'll never forget. When I told him I was leaving, he looked genuinely surprised, maybe even a little afraid. I think, in his own oblivious way, he had believed I would always be there to catch him if he stumbled. He started listing reasons I shouldn't quit, talking about family unity, and how we could make it work. I just told him it already had worked for him. I packed my things quietly the next day. My desk fit into one small box. A few personal items, some notebooks, a photo of me with the staff from our first big wedding job. I left the keys on my desk and took one last look around the office. For the first time, it didn't feel like home. It felt like a cage I had finally stepped out of. That night, my parents called again. They weren't angry, just disappointed. My mother said I was being dramatic. My father said I was abandoning the family when they needed me most. I let them talk. I'd heard the same words before, wrapped in different meanings, guilt disguised as love. When they finished, I told them calmly that I loved them, but I couldn't keep being the background of someone else's story. There was silence on the other end. Then my father sighed and said, "You're making a mistake, Rachel." Maybe I was, but at least it would be my mistake. In the days that followed, I started feeling emotions I hadn't let myself feel in years: peace, freedom, fear, possibility. I slept through the night for the first time in weeks. I met an old friend for coffee and realized how much I'd missed simple human connection. I went for walks without my phone, without the constant anxiety of being on call. It was strange, but exhilarating, like waking up from a long, exhausting dream. But life has a way of circling back to unfinished business. 2 weeks after I left, I got a call from one of our oldest clients, Mrs. Donovan, the one who used to bake pies for every event. She told me she'd been trying to reach someone at the office for days about a major invoice discrepancy, but no one had responded. My gut twisted. I told her I didn't work there anymore, but I promised to look into it. When I checked the company's email, I still had access then, I saw dozens of unread messages. Supplier complaints, missed payments, and 2 canceled contracts. Avon was drowning, and my parents didn't even realize it yet. Part of me felt vindicated, part of me terrified. I knew what would happen next. They'd call me, ask me to fix it, beg me to come back, and maybe once upon a time I would have. But this time I couldn't. I closed the laptop, took a deep breath, and whispered to myself that it wasn't my problem anymore. The weeks following my departure were some of the most surreal I've ever experienced. At first, I felt a strange emptiness, like leaving the business had ripped out a part of my identity. For years, I had measured my worth by how well I could hold everything together, how gracefully I could prevent disaster, how tirelessly I could work without recognition. Suddenly, I was untethered. I didn't have a schedule filled with client calls, staff management, or event planning. I didn't have to answer to anyone, including Evan or my parents. The silence was deafening, but it was also liberating. I started small. I spent entire mornings drinking coffee on the balcony of my new apartment, watching the city wake up without a single obligation hanging over me. I explored hobbies I had long abandoned, painting, hiking, even learning to bake bread without the pressure of producing for clients. Every brushstroke and kneaded loaf was a reminder that I could invest in myself, that I didn't have to exist solely as a cog in a machine. I began journaling again, documenting not just my experiences but my emotions, the anger, frustration, sadness, and the cautious optimism that I was learning to embrace. Of course, leaving didn't erase the ties entirely. My parents called nearly every day at first. My mother's voice trembled when she asked if I was sure about my decision, as if my presence in the company was the only thing keeping the family from fracturing. My father, more practical, tried to discuss logistics, client follow-ups, unpaid invoices, staffing shortages. I listened politely but firmly, repeating the same sentence I had rehearsed: I loved them. I cared about the business, but it was no longer my responsibility to carry the weight they refused to acknowledge. They didn't understand at first, and their disappointment was palpable. But slowly, the calls became fewer, the tension less suffocating. Evan, on the other hand, became almost unrecognizable. The confident, charming persona I had watched dominate the celebration began to crack under pressure. Within a few weeks, several high-profile clients had expressed dissatisfaction with delayed responses and mismanaged events. Vendors complained about missed payments, and staff turnover increased because Evan had no idea how to maintain operations without my guidance. For the first time, the illusion of effortless leadership shattered. I heard from a few loyal staff members that Evan was panicking, calling my phone in desperation, but I didn't answer. I wanted him to experience the consequences of his own decisions. to understand that real leadership required more than charm or ideas. Watching from a distance was both satisfying and sobering. I felt a vindicated sense of justice, yes, but also a pang of grief. I had poured my heart and soul into a business that my family had publicly credited to someone else. My accomplishments had been invisible in the narrative of our family's success. I had worked tirelessly to preserve their vision, their reputation, and their pride, while my own achievements were dismissed. The realization was painful, but it was also clarifying. I had been defined by their approval for too long, and now I had the freedom to define myself on my own terms. In the solitude of my new routine, I began to explore what that meant. I reached out to old friends and colleagues I had neglected, and their support reminded me that recognition doesn't have to come from family to matter. I networked with other entrepreneurs, sharing experiences and learning from people who understood the sacrifices required to build something meaningful. The validation I had sought for years suddenly appeared in unexpected places, in conversations with strangers, in client appreciation emails, and even in my own growing sense of self-worth. Eventually, my parents and Evan realized that I wasn't coming back. The business struggled through the first few months without me. I heard stories secondhand. Clients switching to competitors, projects falling behind, Evan growing increasingly frustrated. My parents' tone softened when they called, but it was too late to reclaim my energy and my time. They finally understood, though perhaps not fully, that my contributions had been the backbone of everything they now celebrated. I didn't gloat, didn't rub it in. I simply carried on with my life, free from the constant exhaustion and invisibility that had marked the previous decade. Through this distance, I learned another lesson: sacrifice without acknowledgement, no matter how noble, is still a form of invisibility. And while I had once believed that keeping quiet and putting others first was virtuous, I now recognized the danger in allowing my value to be determined entirely by others. My worth was not measured by applause, recognition, or the gratefulness of those I loved. It was measured by my own choices, my own integrity, and my ability to honor myself. I started a small consultancy of my own, helping businesses organize operations efficiently, something I had perfected during my years at Linford & Daughters. For the first time, my skills were acknowledged explicitly, without anyone taking credit for my work. Clients knew my name, and my reputation grew organically. It was gratifying in a way I had never experienced before, because it wasn't about familial approval or inherited responsibility. It was about what I had built and the impact I had on others who valued me for my contributions. Looking back, the years of sacrifice weren't wasted. They had shaped me into someone capable of enduring long nights, solving impossible problems, and managing crises with grace. But they had also taught me a painful lesson about boundaries, visibility, and self-worth. My parents and Evan were never truly malicious, but they were blind to the labor that had kept their world intact. That blindness could no longer control me. The liberation I felt wasn't dramatic or cinematic. It was quiet, steady, and powerful. I could breathe, think, create, and live without fear of being erased. The family I had devoted my life to would continue their story, with or without me, and I had begun writing mine for the first time. It wasn't about revenge, recognition, or proving anyone wrong. It was about honoring the value of my own work, the reality of my own efforts, and the truth that sacrifice only matters when it is recognized, sometimes most importantly, by oneself. For the first time in years, I felt seen, not by the world, not by my family, but by myself. And that, I realized, was the most meaningful recognition of all.